January 12, 1945. 2:47 p.m. The Saigon River, French Indochina. Commander Tadao Kuwahara stands on the bridge of the destroyer Ukuru, watching his convoy wind through the muddy bends of the river. 15 ships, 5 tankers, 10 escorts, and cargo vessels. The scene is surreal. The river curves so sharply that water disappears from view, hidden behind the gentle bends. The ships appear to float on rich green flatland, looming incongruously above the alluvial plain like metal ghosts suspended over rice paddies. Kuwahara scans the sky through his binoculars. Clear. Too clear. The tankers in his convoy are defenseless. The promised 25-minute machine guns never arrived. Shore facilities were stripped of weapons weeks ago, a futile attempt to replace the staggering losses elsewhere. But the guns destined for these ships simply vanished into the chaos of a collapsing supply system. It doesn't matter. Machine guns won't stop what's coming. Ahead, the lead tanker's signal flags snap in the humid breeze. Behind, another tanker's hull sits dangerously low in the water, overloaded beyond safety margins because every extra barrel matters now. Every barrel, every liter, every drop. The fuel in those tankers represents something the Imperial Japanese Navy can no longer afford to lose. Every liter has been counted, every barrel accounted for, every drop measured against the dwindling reserves that stand between the combined fleet and absolute paralysis. Kuwahara knows the calculations by heart. His logistics officers showed him the charts before departure. The home islands need 160,000 barrels monthly just to keep the remnants of the fleet operational. They're receiving less than half that now. These 5 tankers carry perhaps 30,000 barrels between them. 30,000 barrels. For an empire. 300 miles to the east, something else is happening. USS Essex, one of 24 American fleet carriers prowling the Pacific, has just completed routine underway replenishment. A fleet oiler pulled alongside 90 minutes ago, connected fuel hoses, and pumped until Essex's bunkers were full. The oiler carried 80,000 barrels. It will service 3 more ships today. Tomorrow, another oiler will arrive, and another the day after that. The sailor who disconnected the fuel hose doesn't think about it. Neither does the officer who signed the refueling chit. Neither does the admiral commanding the task force. They never have to think about it. And that difference between desperate calculation and casual abundance is about to be written in fire and mathematics across the South China Sea. Rewind 3 years and 1 month. January 10, 1942. Off the coast of Kyushu, Japan's southernmost home island. The ocean is calm, the sky is perfect, and Taiyo Maru steams south at the center of a 7-ship convoy bound for the Dutch East Indies. 900 men crowd the ship's accommodations, double the normal passenger load. But no one complains. These aren't ordinary passengers. They're oil technicians, engineers, refinery specialists, the vanguard of Japan's new energy empire. Their mission is simple: restart the oil fields. In 2 months of lightning offensive, Japanese forces have seized the richest petroleum region in Asia: Palembang on Sumatra, Tarakan and Balikpapan in Borneo, Wonokromo on Java, Yanangyanug in Burma. The captured fields can produce 116,000 barrels daily, enough to make Japan self-sufficient. The plan is elegant, the mathematics seem sound. Seize the fields, restore production, ship the oil home, fuel the military machine, win the war before America's industrial capacity can mobilize. The men aboard Taiyo Maru understand their importance. They peer at the vast expanse of sea and sky, aware they're witnessing the birth of a new order. What they don't know, what none of them know yet, is that the plan contains a fatal flaw embedded in its very foundation. The flaw isn't in the oil fields. Those will produce spectacularly once restored. The flaw isn't in the refineries. Japanese engineers will work miracles getting them operational. The flaw is in the ships. Japan began the war with 65 tankers totaling 575,000 tons. That sounds like a lot until you understand the distances involved. From Palembang to Japan, 3,200 miles. From Balikpapan to Japan, 2,400 miles. From Tarakan to Japan, 1,800 miles. Through waters that will soon be infested with American submarines. 3 out of every 4 Japanese tankers are assigned exclusively to hauling Southeast Asian oil to the home islands. There's no reserve capacity, no margin for error, no redundancy. A tanker construction program exists on paper, but shipyards can't build fast enough. Steel is scarce. Skilled workers are being drafted for the army. The mathematics look sound on the chart tables in Tokyo. They don't account for the mathematics of attrition. 5,000 miles to the east, a different calculation is being made. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Shortly after 10 a.m. Admiral Husband Kimmel surveys the devastation. 8 battleships sunk or crippled. 3 cruisers and 3 destroyers damaged. 189 aircraft destroyed. The Japanese attackers are long gone. But they left something behind. Something they didn't bomb. Something they apparently didn't consider worth targeting. The tank farms. 15 massive oil storage tanks on the hills above the harbor, clearly visible from the air, filled to capacity with 4.5 million barrels of fuel. Fleet tankers had just completed resupply operations. The storage was at maximum capacity. Every tank brimming. Kimmel will later testify. If they had destroyed the oil which was all above ground at the time, it would have forced the withdrawal of the fleet to the coast because there wasn't any oil anywhere else out there to keep the fleet operating. Admiral Harold Stark, Chief of Naval Operations, will agree. If they had devoted some of their attack to our shops, oil storage, etc., it would have been a lot rougher going for a considerable period. How much rougher? The undamaged storage holds enough fuel to fill the tanks of 50 fleet carriers, 50 battleships, and 50 destroyers to absolute capacity. With access to those supplies, the Navy continues using Pearl Harbor as its main Pacific base. 3 carriers that were absent on December 7th plus 2 rushed from the Atlantic have fuel to operate. 6 months later, those carriers win the Battle of Midway. The Japanese chose to focus on the battleships, the symbols of naval power. They ignored the logistics, the foundation of naval power. It's the first strategic error in the mathematics of oil. It won't be the last. March 1942, Palembang, Sumatra. The Japanese conquest of the Dutch East Indies is complete. It took less than 3 months. The prize is everything they hoped for. The oil fields are vast. The refineries are sophisticated. And the fleeing Dutch left behind an unexpected windfall. 4 million barrels of refined fuel in abandoned storage tanks. 4 million barrels, just sitting there. It's like finding money in the street. Japanese engineers swarm over the facilities at Palembang. Some wells are damaged. The Dutch tried to sabotage them before fleeing. But the destruction is superficial. Within weeks, crude is flowing again. The refineries restart. The Japanese flag flies over what was the richest petroleum complex outside of the United States. The mathematics of empire seem to be working. Then the paradox emerges. A barrel of crude oil doesn't come out of a refinery as a barrel of anything you want. It comes out as whatever the chemistry of that particular crude naturally produces. At Palembang, that mix is roughly 20% aviation gasoline, high octane, desperately needed, 30% motor gasoline, useful but not critical, 40% fuel oil, essential for ships, 10% other products, lubricants, diesel, etc. Japan needs that aviation fuel. The war depends on it, so the refineries run at full capacity to maximize aviation fuel production. But there's a problem. To get 20,000 barrels of aviation fuel, you must produce 80,000 barrels of other products, and there aren't enough tankers to ship it all. So they make a choice. The aviation fuel goes to waiting tankers for immediate shipment to Japan. The rest gets burned. Thousands of barrels of perfectly good motor gasoline and fuel oil are burned in open pits or pumped back into the ground because there's no way to transport it. Production continues at full capacity, not because Japan needs 100,000 barrels daily from Palembang, but because they need the 20,000 barrels of aviation fuel that comes with it. 80% waste. It's economically insane. It's strategically insane. But it's mathematically necessary given the tanker shortage. A Japanese logistics officer sits at his desk in a temporary headquarters building working his abacus. His fingers fly across the beads, clicking them back and forth. He's calculating fuel requirements for the next major fleet operation. The numbers don't add up. He runs the calculation again. Still don't add up. One more time. The problem isn't his math. The problem is reality. There isn't enough fuel available to conduct the operation as planned. He makes a note in his logbook. Recommends reducing the scale of the operation. Suggests delaying until more fuel arrives. If more fuel arrives, the counting has begun. August 1942, Lunga Point, Guadalcanal. USS McFarland limps into the anchorage, its fantail a smoking wreck. Japanese bombers caught her unloading precious aviation gasoline for Henderson Field. The bombs turned the rear deck into twisted flaming metal. But the forward cargo holds are intact. Marines and sailors work through the night, offloading drums of aviation fuel and shuttling them across to Guadalcanal. Every drum means another sortie for the Marine dive bombers and fighters defending the island. Admiral Robert Gormley, commanding the South Pacific Force, will later reflect on that moment. If they hadn't arrived when they did, we wouldn't have Guadalcanal. 4 fleet tankers arrive days later. They carry enough bunker fuel to keep the supporting naval forces operational for another week. And another week. And another. The American supply system is simple in concept. Never let the front run dry. Fleet oilers are purpose-built for this mission. Each carries between 50,000 and 100,000 barrels. Each is equipped with enough hose and cable to refuel 2 ships simultaneously. The average warship can stay operational for 6 days before resupplying. So the oilers rotate through the fleet on a predictable schedule, topping off fuel bunkers before they run low. At Guadalcanal, U.S. naval forces require 28,000 barrels daily. The oilers deliver it without fail. No ship is ever immobilized waiting for fuel. No operation is ever canceled for lack of fuel. No admiral ever sits at his desk calculating whether he has enough fuel to sortie. The counting happens somewhere else. In planning offices in Pearl Harbor, in tanker scheduling rooms in San Francisco, in refinery offices in California and Texas. But it never happens at the operational level. The officers who fight the war don't count barrels. They assume the barrels will be there. And they always are. In California, oil wells pump continuously. The fields at Santa Barbara alone have produced hundreds of millions of barrels since 1896. They're still producing. They'll keep producing. Texas wells are even more prolific. Oklahoma, Louisiana, Pennsylvania. The United States produces 3.8 million barrels of crude oil daily in 1942. That's 63% of total world production. Japan produces 5,000 barrels daily from its domestic fields. The ratio is 760 to 1. But even that doesn't capture the full scale of the disparity. Because the United States also possesses 60% of global refining capacity. The infrastructure to turn crude oil into useful products, gasoline, aviation fuel, diesel, lubricants, at scale. Japan conquered oil fields. America built an oil civilization. There's a difference. November 1943, 200 miles east of Luzon, Philippines, 400 hours. The American submarine surfaces under a moonless sky. The captain raises his periscope, scanning the horizon. There, to the northwest, running lights, a convoy. The submarine submerges, moves into attack position, waits. As dawn breaks, the picture becomes clear through the periscope. 6 cargo ships and 2 tankers in formation, escorted by 3 destroyers. The tankers are priority targets, torpedoes away. The first tanker explodes in a tower of flame. Burning oil spreads across the water. The second tanker tries to evade but takes a torpedo amidships and begins listing heavily. The destroyers race toward the submarine's last known position, dropping depth charges. But the American sub is already slipping away, moving deep. Mission accomplished. 2 tankers, approximately 16,000 barrels of fuel, gone. In Tokyo, the loss is recorded not in tonnage but in barrels. 16,000 barrels that will never reach the home islands. 16,000 barrels that can't fuel the fleet. The counting becomes more urgent. Before June 1943, an average of 51,000 barrels per day reached Japan from the southern territories. By October, losses to submarines and aircraft have reduced that to 38,000 barrels daily. It's not enough. In November 1943, the Imperial Navy creates the Grand Escort Fleet, an entire naval command dedicated solely to protecting tankers and cargo ships in the war zones. Aircraft carriers are assigned to convoy escort duty instead of striking enemy targets. A string of air bases is established along the Asian mainland coast to provide air cover for the convoy routes. It's a massive commitment of resources. It's also too little, too late. Commander Kuwahara gets his first assignment to convoy escort duty in late 1943. His first run from Moji to Singapore is uneventful. A single high-altitude B-24 attack that produces no hits. Lucky, Kuwahara thinks. He doesn't know that this is as good as it gets. In 16 months, these convoy runs will become floating funeral pyres. 3,000 miles to the east, a different kind of operation is underway. Summer 1944. Operation Forager, the invasion of the Marianas. The American Fifth Fleet assembles for the assault. 600 ships, including 14 battleships, 25 carriers, 26 cruisers, and 144 destroyers. It's the largest naval force in history. And it's mobile. Sustainably, indefinitely mobile. Fleet consumption for fuel oil, bunker oil, diesel, and lubricants, 93,000 barrels per day. That's just for the ship's engines. It doesn't include aviation fuel for 1,200 carrier aircraft. 93,000 barrels per day. The fleet oilers work around the clock, shuttling between fuel storage at advanced bases and the warships at sea. They conduct underway replenishment, pulling alongside moving ships, connecting hoses while both vessels maintain speed, pumping fuel, disconnecting, moving to the next customer. It's dangerous, it's difficult, it's routine. No carrier ever misses a strike because it's low on fuel. No battleship ever holds back from shore bombardment to conserve fuel. No destroyer ever breaks off from screening duty to refuel. The fuel is always there. Let's pause on that number. 93,000 barrels per day for the U.S. Fifth Fleet. In 1944, Japan's total petroleum consumption, military and civilian, army and navy, aircraft and ships, industry and transportation, the entire empire from Manchuria to the East Indies, is 103,000 barrels per day. One American fleet consumes 90% as much fuel as the entire Japanese nation. The mathematics of industrial war are playing out in real time, and mathematics doesn't care about fighting spirit. January 1944, Imperial Naval Headquarters, Tokyo. A staff meeting is underway. Charts cover the walls showing convoy routes, tanker positions, fuel deliveries, consumption rates. Every proposal is measured in fuel cost. A planned operation in the Philippines? How much fuel does it require? Is that much fuel available? Can we accumulate that much in time? The conversation revolves not around tactics or strategy, but around arithmetic. If we sortie the carriers to here, that requires 40,000 barrels just for transit. Do we have 40,000 barrels available? Silence. We could have it in 3 weeks if the next 2 convoys arrive intact. And if they don't? More silence. The desperation breeds innovation. Not good innovation, desperate innovation. Cargo ships are converted to makeshift tanker duty. Their holds are filled with drums of fuel oil. More drums are lashed to their decks. It's dangerous. A single shell hit will turn the entire ship into a fireball. But they have no choice. Fishing vessels are pressed into service, carrying whatever fuel they can hold. Ships are overloaded far beyond safety margins. Better to risk sinking from overload than to make the long journey partially full. Someone proposes an ingenious solution, enormous rubber bags that can hold up to 500 barrels of oil, towed behind tugs from the East Indies to Singapore. It's tried. It fails. Aviation gasoline, what they most desperately need, reacts chemically with the rubber and dissolves it. Ships begin sailing only at night, hugging coastlines, seeking shelter during daylight hours when aircraft dominate. When some air cover is available, they sail only during daylight, hiding at night. Either way, transit times double or triple, and the submarines keep hunting. February 17th and 18th, 1944, Truk Atoll, Caroline Islands. Admiral Raymond Spruance's Task Force 58 appears without warning. 9 aircraft carriers, 6 battleships, hundreds of aircraft. For 2 days, American planes pound Truk in round-the-clock operations. When the smoke clears, 186,000 tons of Japanese shipping has been destroyed. Of that, 52,000 tons were tankers. Tankers, the lifeblood of the fleet, irreplaceable. In the months that follow, the pattern repeats. American carrier task forces strike Palau, Yap, Ulithi, Wolai. Every strike destroys more tankers. Each lost tanker means less fuel reaching Japan. Less fuel means fewer operations. Fewer operations mean losing more territory. Losing territory means longer convoy routes through more dangerous waters. Longer routes mean more exposure to submarines and aircraft. More exposure means more tankers lost. The mathematics spiral downward. By mid-1944, the Imperial Navy faces a stark choice. Preserve the fleet by keeping it in port or expend the remaining fuel in operations that probably won't succeed. Neither option leads to victory. Meanwhile, in the United States, a different kind of crisis is unfolding. Summer 1942, Petroleum Administration Office, Washington, D.C. The charts on the wall show a problem. The Allies need 20 million barrels of 100-octane aviation fuel this year. Current refining capacity can produce only 9 million barrels. Not enough. Not nearly enough. The British are desperate for high-octane fuel. The RAF literally cannot fight without it. The Soviet Union, under Lend-Lease, is requesting 18,000 barrels daily, and America's own air forces are expanding rapidly. More planes need more fuel. Where will it come from? The answer is American industrial capacity. 32 new refineries are rushed into construction in 1942. All financed by the government. All built in record time. During the war, more than $1 billion spent building nearly 200 new refineries specifically for aviation fuel production. That's a 50% increase over the total number of refineries that existed in the entire country before the war. Smaller plants are built to produce enhancing agents, butylene, isobutane, cumene, xylidine, that boost octane ratings. Chemical engineers develop improved formulations. The fuel is still called 100-octane because you can't exceed 100% iso-octane in the blend, but performance numbers climb to 130 and above, indicating 30% more power than pure iso-octane. It's expensive, it's resource-intensive, it requires scarce materials and skilled labor. But it works. By September 1945, the United States is producing 600,000 barrels of 100-octane aviation fuel daily, up from 73,000 barrels daily in 1942. Other refineries worldwide in Iran, Curaçao, Trinidad, Calgary add another 80,000 barrels daily. The result? Guam alone, as a forward base in 1944-1945, distributes 120,000 barrels of aviation gasoline daily. One base, 120,000 barrels per day. That's 6 times Japan's total aviation fuel consumption across all fronts: the Pacific, China, Manchuria, Southeast Asia, and the home islands. One American forward base supplies 6 times what an empire can produce. The crisis in American aviation fuel production manifests as temporary delays in training. In July 1943, shortages result in training delays for 147 pilots and 81 bomber crews. Another 160 aviation cadets are diverted to non-flying training for a few weeks. It's considered a serious problem. By American standards, it is. By Japanese standards, it's incomprehensible luxury. Because in 1945, Japanese pilots averaged 2 hours of flying time per month due to fuel shortages. 2 hours per month. The American shortage is industrial inconvenience. The Japanese shortage is existential catastrophe. April 6, 1945. Tokuyama Bay, Japan. The battleship Yamato sits low in the water, taking on fuel. At 64,000 tons displacement, she's the largest battleship ever built. 9 18.1-inch guns, the biggest naval rifles in the world. Armor plate up to 26 inches thick, a floating fortress. And she's preparing for her final mission. The orders came down yesterday. Operation 10 Go. Heaven 1. Yamato, the light cruiser Yahagi, and 8 destroyers will sortie for Okinawa. They will arrive at daybreak on April 8th, charge into the American anchorage, and engage the invasion fleet in a point-blank gun battle. The plan is simple because it has to be. There's no complexity, no nuance, no tactical sophistication, because there's barely enough fuel. The official orders state, fuel for only one-way passage will be supplied. This is a special attack operation. Special attack operation is the euphemism. Everyone knows what it means. Suicide mission. The crew of 2,767 men understands, they've been told. Those who survive the battle, if any survive, are to beach their ships, come ashore, and continue fighting as infantry. Fuel oil is scraped together with great difficulty from storage tanks around the inland sea. 21,000 barrels, just enough for the one-way trip at reduced speed. The orders specify, maintain 20 knots. Save enough fuel for 4 hours of combat at full speed, that's it. Every barrel has been counted, every liter measured. The arithmetic of desperation has reached its logical conclusion. One-way tickets to death. Captain Tamechi Hara, commander of the destroyer Yahagi, watches the fuel hoses being disconnected. He knows the mathematics. At 20 knots, they'll cover about 200 miles before American aircraft find them. They won't even make it halfway to Okinawa. But there's no fuel for a different plan. No fuel for escorts, no fuel for air cover, no fuel for anything except this. On April 7th at 3:20 p.m., the task force sortie. The weather is clear, the sea is calm. 6 hours later, American scout planes from Task Force 58 locate them. At 12:30 p.m. on April 7th, the first wave of American carrier aircraft arrives. Nearly 400 aircraft from 11 carriers. The battle, if it can be called that, lasts 2 hours. Yamato takes at least 10 torpedo hits and 7 bomb hits. At 2:23 p.m., she capsizes and explodes. The forward magazine detonates, sending a mushroom cloud visible for 100 miles. 2,498 men die. Yahagi and 4 destroyers are also sunk. The fuel Yamato carried, the one-way supply so carefully accumulated and counted, burns on the surface of the East China Sea. It was never used for combat. It was never enough anyway. That same week, January 1945, somewhere in the Philippine Sea, USS Essex is conducting routine operations. A fleet oiler, call sign fuel barge on the radio net, approaches from astern. Fuel barge, this is Essex, request replenishment. Essex, fuel barge, Roger, coming alongside your port quarter. The oiler maneuvers into position. Both ships maintain 15 knots, steaming parallel courses 50 feet apart. Line handlers shoot messenger lines across. The light lines are used to pull over heavier hoses. Within minutes, black oil is pumping from the oiler's tanks to Essex's fuel bunkers. 90 minutes later, Essex is topped off. The hoses are disconnected, retrieved, stowed. The oiler pulls away. Tomorrow or the next day, another oiler will arrive, and another after that. Nobody thinks about it. The invisible logistics army makes it happen. Service Force Pacific, the unglamorous but essential command that nobody writes home about. Dedicated tanker fleets. Forward bases with massive storage capacity, pipeline systems, mobile supply. The fleet train. Ulithi Atoll in the Caroline Islands becomes a massive floating fuel depot. Tankers arrive from Pearl Harbor, from the west coast, shuttle forward to the operating areas, refuel the warships, return to Ulithi, reload, repeat. The cycle never stops. 3,000 miles of ocean separate California from the forward operating areas. Those supply lines are never seriously threatened. Japanese submarines are too few and too busy defending home waters. Japanese aircraft can't reach the convoy routes. The fuel flows unimpeded. Not a single major operation is canceled for lack of fuel. Not a single fleet carrier is immobilized. Not a single task force sits idle waiting for oilers. The Operation Forager statistics bear repeating: 600 ships, 93,000 barrels per day for ship fuel alone, plus aviation fuel for 1-200 carrier aircraft. The fleet consumed more fuel daily than most nations produced, and it never ran dry. This isn't a victory won in battle. There's no decisive engagement over fuel supplies, no dramatic confrontation. Just the grinding mathematics of industrial logistics. Japan calculated every liter, rationed every drop, counted every barrel, and still ran out. America simply delivered. January 1945, Tokyo. The Imperial Navy makes a final, desperate decision. All ships in the home islands that normally use 96,000 barrels monthly, cruisers, destroyers, auxiliary vessels, are inactivated, immobilized, tied to docks. The fast battleship Haruna becomes a fixed anti-aircraft platform in Kure Harbor. She has no fuel to move. Several aircraft carriers are kept at their berths in Kure and Beppu. They'll remain there until American aircraft sink them at anchor. The combined fleet has effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force, not because it lacks ships. The ships are there. Not because it lacks men. The crews are there. Not because it lacks ammunition. Shells and torpedoes remain in magazines. It ceases to exist because it has no fuel. In the air, the crisis is even more acute. Lieutenant General Sugawara, commander of the 6th Air Army, reports, planes equipped to use 92-octane gasoline had to be supplied with 87-octane during these operations, and the quality went down steadily, shortening the plane's range and decreasing efficiency in general. But even low-grade fuel becomes scarce. Lieutenant Commander Ono, staff officer of the 13th Naval Air Flotilla, summarizes the situation in a single devastating sentence. Shortages of fuel prevented planes from averaging more than 2 hours flying time a month. 2 hours per month. Not enough to maintain proficiency, not enough to train replacement pilots, not enough to conduct meaningful operations. The kamikaze missions become in part a practical response to this reality. Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the Kamikaze Corps, will later admit, suicide attack was the only sure and reliable attack by airmen whose training had been limited because of the shortage of fuel. It's not just fanaticism, it's arithmetic. Poorly trained pilots with minimal fuel can't conduct complex combat operations, but they can be given enough fuel for a one-way flight. They can be aimed at a target. They can dive. The mathematics of fuel scarcity dictate tactics. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey will later conclude, the southern resources area, the prize for which the war was fought, was gone, and American fleets sailed with impunity to the shores of Eastern Asia. All hope of future resistance had depended on oil, and now the tankers were sunk and the oil cut off. The surface fleet was gone, and so were 7,000 aircraft, expended in 4 months' defense of the last supply line. 7,000 aircraft, 4 months, fighting to defend oil convoys that couldn't get through anyway. By May 1945, Japan is defeated. Not because of atomic bombs, those haven't been dropped yet. Not because of invasion, that hasn't happened yet. Defeated because the mathematics reached zero. The counting stopped because there was nothing left to count. We return finally to Commander Kuwahara, January 12, 1945, 2:15 p.m., the South China Sea. His destroyer Ukuru has survived the attack, barely. 12 men dead, 29 wounded. Bombs punched through the main deck but somehow missed critical machinery. Around him, the sea burns. Tanker Kyokun is a fireball, its 10,000 tons of fuel adding to the inferno. 2 freighters burn violently before slipping beneath the waves. The cruiser Kashi sits on the bottom with its bow jutting 10 feet above water. Admiral Shibuya and his entire staff are dead. Kuwahara stands on his damaged bridge watching oil burn on the surface. He does the calculation in his head. He can't help himself. Kyokun carried perhaps 8,000 barrels. The other tankers that survived are damaged, will return to port partially full. This convoy was supposed to deliver 30,000 barrels to the home islands. Maybe 10,000 will make it. 20,000 barrels lost. How many more convoys can they run? How many more months before the reserves hit zero? The mathematics are inescapable. 5,000 miles away on USS Essex, a different scene. The fuel hoses have been stowed. The oiler has pulled away. The deck crew is securing equipment. An ensign marks the log. Replenishment complete. Next scheduled, January 14th. 2 days. He doesn't think about it. The Japanese Navy counted every liter to the very end. They had sophisticated logistics planning, detailed accounting, meticulous record-keeping, every drop measured, every barrel tracked, every transfer logged. The American carriers never had to count at all. They didn't need meticulous accounting. They needed overwhelming production capacity and the logistics infrastructure to deliver it. Japan understood this from the beginning. Their own war planning documents acknowledged they couldn't match American industrial output. They planned to compensate with superior fighting spirit, tactical brilliance, and willingness to sacrifice. But modern war between industrialized nations isn't decided by fighting spirit. It's decided by logistics, by industrial output, by the unglamorous mathematics of supply chains and production capacity and refinery throughput and tanker tonnages. Admiral Thomas Moorer, who served in the Pacific and survived oil shortages firsthand, later reflected, "What I learned then was never lose a war, and the way to lose a war is to run out of oil." Japan lost the war for oil before they lost the war in combat. They started the war to secure oil. They conquered the richest oil fields in Asia. They got the oil flowing. And they still lost. Because they started with 65 tankers and America started with 4.7 million barrels per day of production. Because they counted liters and America counted in thousands of barrels because mathematics doesn't negotiate. The difference between meticulous scarcity and casual abundance was written in the burning oil on the South China Sea, in the immobilized fleet at Kure, in the aircraft that couldn't fly, in the one-way missions, in the final desperate calculations. That difference between having to count every liter and never needing to count at all, determined the outcome of the Pacific War as surely as any battle. The Japanese Navy counted every leader to the end. The American carriers never ran dry. And that, more than strategy or tactics or fighting spirit, was the mathematics of defeat.